Okay, everyone, so in this series, we're going to have two basic goals. One, we're going to introduce the particle system. Particle systems are another component that can be added to a game object, and it has a wide range of applications. It can be used for a fire effect, an explosion, can be used for water, can be used for laser effects, electricity. So specifically, we're going to look at a fire. And just to let you know ahead of time, it is absolutely not meant to be photorealistic. It's going to be kind of cartoonish fire. This isn't meant to be about visual fidelity. It's meant to introduce how particle systems work and then how to modify that particle system in real time based on maybe a collision or based over time. So the example, as I said, we're going to use is a fire. And the reason for that is if you think about a campfire, if you don't put any more wood onto it, that campfire should hopefully get smaller and die down. The opposite would be, say, a forest fire where it continues to spread and grow. So a particle system basically just keeps cycling through the settings that you give it. By attaching a script, you can then change that over time or like say based on a collision. Maybe you're doing a firefighting game, and so when the water hits the fire gets like disrupted and then eventually goes out. So let's start with the beginning of making the particle system and having it look basically like a fire. Because dealing with particle systems is a lot like sculpting, you make one little change and it forces you to make another change and another change. At a certain point, I might skip ahead and then just review the final settings. There's nothing absolute about what I'm going to use. You may actually come up with something that looks even better to you. The idea is to get a system in place and then modify that system with the script. As you can see, I am doing this in Unity 2017.3. Up to this point, I've been using Unity 5.4, and prior to that, I was using a version of Unity 4.6, I think. Anyway, so going forward, I'll be using Unity 2017.3. That is the newest production version. I believe there's a 2018 that is in beta, so this is the newest production version. When you start a new project, a couple things are different. One, no camera. Two, no light. So you can just add those. So game object, and you can just do camera, and then back up to game object, go to light, and we'll do directional light. This is what normally Unity would open up to, and I believe I was using 5.4. Anyways, so that gets us back up to where we used to be when you create a new project. Down here, you can see I have one asset. I just dragged and dropped this in from a external folder, and all it is a PNG that I drew in a paint program. You can use whatever paint program you want. There's nothing really special about this so much as that it's not circular, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay, so let's actually create the particle system. So game object, and if you notice, it's not an object in and of itself. It's within effects now because it used to be a top level object and it really wasn't. It's really a component. So we'll go to effects and we'll go to particle system. So it creates a separate object, but as you can see how there's a transform component, well, a particle system is really just another component, probably the most complex component, but still another component. Taking that one step further, the component is made of modules, which we'll get to in probably the next video. Like this up here is the main module where it controls the core functions, for want of a better term, and then you have all these individual modules, which we're going to go through now. And the reason why that's important, knowing that they're modules, is that when we get into the coding, you're going to see that we have to specifically name drop these modules and say, okay, we're using the main module or we're using the emission module, that kind of thing. Okay, so I don't particularly like the fact that they put these squares around the individual particles, but they do. I'll see if I can find a way to shut that off. But that's not how it looks in the final when it's actually running. So right now everything is on top of each other. So take that particle system and put it out in front of the camera. If you want your point of view to change, you can just scroll the scroll wheel back a little bit. And over here in the inspector, you can see its location. So you can see it's sitting at +11. And if you go out here to the camera is out at 0 on the z-axis. So we're just going to run this so you can see what that looks like. Doesn't look like much of anything other than a bunch of will-o-wisps. Now, so this is the first point that I want to get at. Those circles, okay? Because it's circular, certain effects you won't notice. Like say you want to rotate the individual particles to make them more complex. Well, you can't really do that if it's circular. So what we're going to do is before we go any further, we're going to change in the particle system. There's this default material. We're going to create a new one. So right-click, create material. We'll call this fire mat. You select fire mat. You're going to take your little flame image, put it up here where it says albedo. And now that is basically what you've created material with that as the source image. And then you're going to apply the material to the particle system. And this is going to look terrible at first, but it's important to see why you need the various settings. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop that. And you can see it no longer says default particle, it says fire mat. Really, really terrible. So unless you want this to look like a deck of cards and you're throwing the cards out, it's really not the effect that you'd want. So a couple of things you have to do. Certain changes you make at the individual level as far as the image, although in this case we're not. Certain changes you're going to make at the material level, and then the other changes will be made at the particle system itself. So it's important to understand that interdependence. So what drives a lot of the visual effect, particularly are you looking for something that's cartoonish? Is it meant to be like a negative image? Is it meant to have a glow? Will all be about this. So the shader that you choose. So you could spend a very long time tweaking this and getting what you want, but we're going to use particles, and I believe it was alpha blended pre-multiply. So still doesn't look like much of anything, but now at least you don't see the background. The background is now transparent. So now we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts of this. So in the particle system, you're going to see these settings, okay? And we're not going to go through all of them. But let's take a look at start lifetime. This is how long each individual particle lasts. So when that particle is created, how long does it last? Let's change that to 1. And don't be surprised if I change numbers multiple times, because again, this is like sculpting. You're going to make one change which impacts something else. Start speed, 5 is probably too fast, so let's try 2. And that's the key word, try. These are not absolutes, whatever looks right to you. Particle size is probably way too big, so let's make this like 0.2. Start color. Color is actually affected in a few places. In the main module here, you change start color, but you can also change the color over time. So we're going to click on start color and the color picker appears, very similar to color pickers in a lot of applications. And let's just start. So first you choose the basic type of color you want over here, and then you actually select what color you want here. In this case, to keep it simple, we're just going to use 255, 255, 0, which gives you yellow. At least one shade of yellow. And as you can see, these are yellow now. So that's the main module. We will revisit this because I haven't actually run it yet to see what I think about it. But let's go down to the emission module. And obviously that doesn't look like a fire, it's too few. So let's bump this up to say 200. You can see that's much fuller now. Which brings us back to the main module. See this max particles? This is a rate. So if this rate results in more than this amount of particles being on the screen at one time, you'll see a break. So I'll do that on purpose. Watch what happens. Oh, it's not lasting long enough, so let's go to... And it's still a little bit too subtle. There we go. See how you got like this poof and a break? Let's just run it so you can see. See, you get this concentration and then there's a break. The reason for it is because you've said don't let more than this amount of particles be on the screen at the one time for that one system. So let's bring that back down to like 200. Okay, so we're getting there. Let's go down to the shape module, and just so you know, if the check isn't there, then the module isn't being utilized. So if you want to test different settings and you don't want to erase your settings, you can just uncheck the module to have those settings not be applied, and then you can check it again to apply it, and you can see the difference. So in the shape, if you notice, you can now see, I believe they call this a widget around the particle system. As you can see, it's a cone. It's a cone shape. You might not want a cone shape. Maybe you want this more to be cylindrical. So to do that, you can just take one of those corners and bring it in. Just so you know, you cannot bring this to a point. You can make it parallel, so you can turn it into a cylinder, but you cannot bring these points in sharper than an angle than at the bottom. Not sure why. I can think of lots of applications for that, like a single flame is we think of as being pointed at the top, torch, things like that. You could definitely think of situations where you'd want the tip to be like pointed, but we'll work on some options in other videos. You can also change the bottom radius if this is too big. Again, there's a point there, and the corresponding number changed here. So even in this this kind of preview, you can see it's starting to look a little bit more fiery. Let's run it now. Okay, certainly not great, but getting there. So I think it should have a little more concentration. So let's change that rate to like, say, 250. And now we're going to start changing. Right now, all this is constant. As I said, the particle system is a cycle, and you can do things over time, but that over time repeats, though. So what we're going to do is if you go to color over lifetime, so we're going to activate that. You click on this. And the bottom, these 2 points, and you can add points in between, is the color. This is the color when the particle starts. This is the color when the particle terminates. This is the transparency when the particle starts. This is the transparency when the particle terminates. So we said, click on this one here, we were using 255, 255, 0. I'm not even going to bother messing with the picker. It'll jump right to where we want. So if, say, the center of the fire is going to be like a yellow color, and we want the top to be like a red color, we're going to click on this one, click here, and this time we'll go to a red. This time it'll just be 255.00. You can choose different numbers in between, but by using the 255, it's easy to remember. So what would happen is this will now change to these colors throughout the life cycle. So let's look at that. It's not what we want yet, but I do want you to see that. Suddenly, I mean, it's not fire yet, but it looks a lot better because now you have this color change. Problem is, again, since it's doing it consistently, you can almost see like a line across where it's changing color. So we don't want it to be that obvious, but we're still working on it. All right, so we'll go back to that. We'll click on that. And what we're going to do is this. We want to create an extra point here. And you can see it automatically says what color it should be there. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to return this to 255. So what we've done is this. We're saying that this is going to change over time, but between here and here, it'll stay the same. Then it changes over time. So this would give you like more of a, it'll stay yellow for a longer period of time. We're going to do the same thing on the other end. We're going to click here, and again, it tells you where it would be. And we're going to set this to 255 even. So what we're doing is it's changing over time, but really only through here now. So this, it's yellow. This, it's red. So it's kind of de-emphasizing all those in-between colors. So that gets us closer to where we want to be. We'll run that one more time. Okay. Right now, the particles are just going straight up in the air. We want them to rotate. And this gets back to what I was saying at the beginning, why we didn't want a circle particle. You could certainly use one, but the problem is you really can't apply a rotation to that because it's circular, and you can't see that it's rotating. By using this, which is not circular, we can create kind of like a disturbance, because even if you don't see the individual particles when we're done, you will get that sense of the fact that it's not a smooth circle, the fact that you've got this wave. So what we're going to do is rotation over lifetime, and depends how much you want it to rotate. Let's do like 720. So it should do 2 full rotations over time. And suddenly that makes it way more lively. That in itself makes a huge change. I don't think there is enough particles yet, so sorry, I'm going to jump back up. So let's increase the max particle count, just so I don't hit that. And let's change this to like 325. Again, sculpting, you're going to go back and forth. All right, so now let's do size over lifetime. So what we're going to do here is right now the particle just disappears at the top. That's really what your eye is seeing. It's seeing that a particle is there and then it's not there. Well, if we shrink it before it disappears, that will look more natural. So if we click here, and with this new version of Unity, I'm not sure why it does this, why it doesn't default to just that. All I do is click on the little image here where it starts at a certain size and keeps at a certain size. That one, for some reason, it was increasing it over time. So if you right-click, you can add a key, and you can add lots of keys. And again, this is not rocket science. This is a little bit of guesswork. But what we want to do is, just like with the color picker, we're saying that this is the life cycle of a single particle. At what point do we want the particle to get smaller? Well, we really don't want it to get smaller too quickly, so we want this towards the end. And what a difference that makes. Suddenly you have these little kind of disconnected particles. Again, not even close to being photorealistic. It's not meant to be. Let's go back up and change particle size a little bit more, because I changed the a couple minutes ago, I changed the emission, and I don't think that really took care of the problem. So you don't have to change start size much, because right now it's 0.2. So if I change it to 0.22, it might not seem like much of an increase, but that's a 10% increase. So we'll actually go to 0.25. So just be mindful that the change you're making is really, particularly when you're dealing very small numbers, you're talking a huge percent increase. See, that suddenly looks much fuller. So we're getting pretty close to where we want to be. It's not as great as an effect as I would like, because ultimately all the particles are rotating in the same direction. But again, we can get into more advanced things as we go. So the last thing we're going to do is change the transparency of color over time. So once again, we're going to the color over lifetime module. And up here we have transparency. So first thing I'm going to do, unlike what I did here, is I'm going to create a key right there to begin with. Why? Because when I created this key after the fact, I had to fix the color. Right now, there's no transition going on. So by creating this, it's at the full there's no transparency. It's the full 255. So if I come here and I drag this down, that means the transition is only happening between here and here. So I'm going to close that. And it's subtle, but you can see that kind of like pinkish glow now because it's becoming translucent at the very end. So you just really softened that top is what you did, because rather than having a particle just disappear, that particle is now getting smaller and it's disappearing and it's becoming translucent. So it's like fading out of existence. I'm just going to move this down a little bit so it's not against the bright backdrop like that, the skybox. There we go. All right, so like I said from the very beginning, this was absolutely not meant to be photorealistic. If you mess around with a few more things, you could make this look even better. So what you could do is you could make the particles be smaller to begin with, because right now they're just kind of popping into existence just as they were popping out of existence. And also what you could do is you could work so that make some changes so not every single particle is changing, is not rotating in the same direction. But this gets us to the end of the first video, because this was just meant to introduce particle systems. The real reason why I'm doing this is for the next video, because the next video is we're going to change this over time. That's what's going to make this interesting. And it's just as well that we're not dealing with anything really complicated, because if it was, then it makes the changing over time even more complicated, because you don't want to break the fidelity. You've come up with a visual that you like, and so if it's really complex, then you have to do a much higher level of maintenance to get that to look right as this scales out. So looking forward to covering that in the next video.